8056, and of course internationally it is +27. You drop the 0, so it's +27 66 479 8056. And I'm with my guest Elinor Sisulu, the literary and human rights activist. She's with us in our Durban studios. Elinor, just I suppose we'll come back to the March of 1956, but just reflecting on the two voice notes that we've heard. As you said a little earlier, there was this long history before 1956 of women standing up for their rights. And what you heard there today, of course, highlighting inequality, highlighting violence against women in modern-day democratic South Africa. We've still got some distance to go, have we not?
Yes, well, South Africa is a country of contradictions, because when you look at the numbers, representation of women in parliament, representation of women in cabinet, South Africa is right out there. It's a leader in the world. There's few countries that have women who have been ministers of defense, ministers of intelligence, in serious portfolios. So in terms of political representation of women, South Africa is done very well. If you look at the diplomatic corps, I think the South African diplomatic corps, the majority are women. So and then in the law, in the constitution, women are protected, and I think South Africa is one of the most progressive constitutions in the world. I think South Africa is the only African country, I stand to be corrected, that actually recognizes and respects sexual orientation in the constitution. But what plays out, the violence against women, the violence against lesbian women, that's a complete contradiction of what the law says. And so the vast difference between legal rights and what actually happens to women is quite huge. I think in business also, South Africa has laws and practices, but this, policies, but this doesn't translate into implementation. And that's the contradiction about this country.
Perhaps then we need to reflect back on that day in 1956. Of course, the speakers list was quite illustrious. It's a who's who of struggle heroines. We've got people like Helen Joseph speaking, Gertrude Shope, Lillian Ngoyi. But one of the projects you've undertaken, that is to collate the stories of ordinary women, those 20,000 plus who came forward, because perhaps one way to set a new narrative is to tell those stories of the unsung heroines who also showed up, so that ordinary folks can relate to their message and their struggle.
Yes, we're really trying to set up a collaborative platform to have an archive on the marches and to retrieve those histories and make them available. We're partnering with South African History Online, which has been a platform which has really been a repository of struggle history and done very well. And we're really grateful that they're interested in partnering on this project. And we will discuss further with the other history, heritage, and archiving organizations, so that we can have an archive of a story, of the story's audio, and where possible film, so that these will be on record for future generations, and that we just won't have this mass of 20,000 people. If you think of it, even the four women that stood there, Helen Joseph, Raima Musa, Sophie de Bruyn Williams at that time, and Lillian Ngoyi. Even them, there's not that much known about them by the younger generation. Helen wrote a lot, so her life is quite well documented, and to some extent Lillian, but it's still not enough, and it's still not on the platforms that young people use. That's why we're really interested in getting the digital archive and on film, radio, and various different platforms, so that these stories can be accessible to young people and they can be inspired, but also that, the stories, we've tended to focus on political history, and we've really neglected our social history. I was speaking at the Phyllis Naidu Memorial Lecture a day before yesterday, and the point was made that in struggle history, the issues about the intimate, the personal, the daily life, the daily grind of struggle doesn't come through as much as it should. So we tend to focus on events and on the big heroes, but not on the people who made it happen at grassroots levels. And I think those are the stories we really, really need to uncover, document, and make sure they're preserved for future generations.
Of course, amongst the things you have done, you're also one of the biographers of Mamo Albertina Sisulu. And this is something she would have wanted, is it not? I mean, she was always insistent that she was but one of many voices, and she wanted those voices, those stories to be told.
Yes, when I always remember, it's very memorable, the interviews I had with her about the 1956 march. And she really would talk about the women, how she got up early to go to Pefeni station, how they really had to be on time. And it was quite a logistical nightmare, the organizing they did, and just the courage of the women in coming, and the spirit of the day, the passion, the commitment, the determination, the complete lack of considering self and putting everything to the cause. And her face would light up when she would talk about this, and she would say, oh, the women, the women. And I feel that she always regretted that those stories didn't come out. And I really feel that it's a tribute to her, and I think it's appropriate in this year of her centenary actually to make up for that neglect of telling these stories, and to make people really appreciate when we talk about Women's Day what we are talking about, and not make it into some kind of lightweight thing. I think it's important for people to understand, and the next generations to understand, that this is a day of profound meaning, a day of sacrifice and commitment, and a day when we should be reflecting on where we are now and asking ourselves, are we really honoring the legacy of all those women?
Final question to you then. It is, of course, the centenary of the birth of Mama Sisulu, and what might she have made of how we observe, how we remember not only the day, but I suppose you could say the history of the struggle, looking back and looking at what's happening in South Africa right now?
I know she used to be pained by abuse, hearing any form of abuse. And this, the fact that today a family has buried a young woman who has taken her life because of abuse, this is something that she would have been deeply, deeply pained about. She and Tata Sisulu were really, you could see the agony when they used to hear about issues of abuse and violence. And I think it would have been quite a shocking thing for her. She was always, would become really emotional, and really even the way she counseled people around her, the young women around her, the young men around her, about maintaining integrity, responsibility, and respect in their relationships. This was really very, very important to her.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Elinor Sisulu, thank you very much for your reflections on this very, very important day. Elinor Sisulu there, the literary and human rights activist, speaking to us from our Durban studios. Now, the president